get something you never had, you have to do something you never did.
It's just for me then. Okay. No, for
That's
no
all
one.
you.
Okay.
I'm good to go.
3, 2. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode with the Paper Trails podcast. I'm your host, Shamaki. Today, joined by my co-host,
Yep.
Mohammed.
Back again.
Back again. How you
Yeah,
feeling?
first time in the studio for a long time.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
joined
How's
by
it
a really
feel?
special guest today. So
Daunting?
I'm honored to be here as well. So
Yeah, of course. And as you said, we are with a very special guest today, Midge Gillis, author of the book that we will be covering today, Piccadilly. And before we get into the book, we want to know a lot more about you, the person behind the books. If you could just quickly introduce yourself.
Sure, well, it's great to be here.
Yeah, of
And
course.
I suppose my full name is Dr. Midge Gillis, and I'm Associate Professor of Teaching of Creative Writing at the University of Cambridge Institute of Continuing Education. I told you it was a long title.
No, it's amazing. And firstly, I just want to say thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be here.
You're very, very nice, very gracious in even sending over the book and essentially facilitating everything to happen. And you know what, it was on my end very, very worth it because
Oh, no, well, that's great. And, you know, I love talking about books. And
yeah.
I would have to say you're not my typical readers. So
Yeah.
it's great. I'm really looking
Absolutely.
forward to
Yeah.
hearing, you know, what
No,
you think
yeah.
about it. So that's great.
yeah,
what it
it's
is.
not a typical book that we would read either. But
Well,
I'm
no,
glad you
that's
read it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about
Yeah.
it, even if there are bits you don't like. So
No, of course. But you know, that's what it is, and especially like with this podcast, that's also what we're trying to do, trying to like sort of, I guess, bridge the gap between even like our peers and our friends are not really into reading.
Yeah.
So essentially creating that bridge between readers and non-readers, and then coming to because at the end of the day, I think the most important thing about books is the discussions that it brings.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that the way I write books has changed
Yeah.
because I think people have got. I know I have a shorter attention span.
Yeah.
So I find my chapters have got shorter as well.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I've got a daughter who's about 23, so
Yeah.
I kind of think of her as maybe she's not a reluctant reader, but I have her in mind when I'm thinking about writing
No,
books.
yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's just how it is, especially now with social media and stuff
Yeah,
like that. It is
yeah.
thing, but we will get into that a lot more because I asked you before we started about 3 items that meant something
Oh
to
yeah.
you, and 2 of them you sent to me as pictures that I'll put up on the podcast, and one of them was your mother and and her sister.
Yes.
You said it could have. You'd like to think it was Piccadilly,
Well,
or was it?
so I'm pretty sure it's Trafalgar Square.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, my mum is the reason I wrote this book because she grew up in Balham and she used to
Okay,
go
yeah.
with her sister,
Yeah.
Marjorie, who I'm named after. And they're in that photo.
Yeah.
And that's them on a trip up to town. And I'm pretty sure it's Trafalgar Square because they're surrounded by pigeons.
Yeah.
But I like to think they're on their way to Piccadilly
Piccadilly,
Circus because my mum
yeah.
used to talk about going there a lot and
Yeah.
going to the cafes and having a chat with her sister.
And was that kind of like your first sort of introduction to Piccadilly?
I think it was even so. I was born in Pinner,
Yeah.
but my mum used to talk about going up to Piccadilly Circus
Yeah.
and having a really good time there.
Yeah.
And I remember when first time I had to have some hockey boots for
Yeah.
school, and you know I grew up in Suffolk, and there are lots of sports shops in Suffolk, but we
Yeah.
had to go up to Piccadilly Circus, and I'm
okay,
thinking,
yeah.
why is that?
Yeah.
And I think it was like it was a kind of pilgrimage for her.
Yeah.
And then I worked in London for about 15 years.
Yeah.
And I always used to love going to Piccadilly Circus because it's so exciting.
Yeah, no, of course it is. What would you say your first experience to Piccadilly?
You know what it was like growing up. You see Times Square on the TV a lot, and
Yeah.
then I think I saw Piccadilly on the TV at some point. I don't know what it was, but I was like, no, it's a British Times
So
Square.
British Times Square, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I actually went there until I was an adult. You know,
Really?
even though
Actually, same,
I was
I
raised
don't
in
know.
North London. And
Yeah.
I mean, getting up there, and yeah, for some reason I was an apprentice back in 2015, and then I was working in Central London, so I was like, let me just explore my
Yeah.
city a bit. And yeah, I visited Piccadilly Circus, and I was like, this actually is. But to be fair, it felt smaller than what I saw on TV. I was,
No,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
interesting.
I was like, oh, there meant to be more screens
Yeah.
here.
Oh, right. So you weren't kind of didn't look at the kind of big screen and think, wow, that's amazing. Because that's one of the things I think when you come up from the tube, it's
Yeah,
so
and you
bright.
see it,
Yeah, it was kind of like, okay, there it is. And that is pretty like impressive.
Yeah.
But I think I don't know. Maybe I thought like it'll be like there'll be more screens around.
Right.
Funny
But it
enough,
just felt
I
like-
thought the same thing.
Did you?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Like
Yeah.
I remember where I saw it on. I think it was like Spooks or something, like a show or was it the movie one? This is before I even went to uni, because when I went to like Westminster, which is
Oh,
right
right, yeah.
nearby. So then you'd see it, and then it did have that Times Square kind of like
Yeah.
effect. Then when I was there, I was like, okay, it's nice.
It kind of felt like a film set. Like you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is used in so many films.
Yeah.
And it's like shorthand for London as
Yeah.
well.
hmm
And I think Eros is always, I always find that smaller than I thought it was going to be. But it's
Yeah.
kind of lit so well
Yeah.
that it's more impressive.
Even
I
with
think.
that, like as we were reading the book, I was like, I don't remember seeing a statue. Like off the top of my head, all I remember
you
is
didn't
the screens.
really?
Yeah, for some reason, I don't know why, but I tend to go there in the evenings a lot more as well. I
Yeah.
suppose.
It looks great in the evenings.
Yeah, it
so
does.
I feel like I don't have a memory of the actual area outside of like just seeing the screens
Yeah.
and seeing booths and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it's weird, but it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And the second item was the was it that a map that you've kind of drew out
Oh yeah.
of?
So I got my daughter, who's an art student,
Yeah.
to draw a map of Piccadilly Circus
Yeah.
because it's got so many interweaving roads, and I
Yeah.
wanted to get them straight in my head so that I could sit at my desk and look at it. And then I printed out lots of pictures of the main buildings I wanted to write about and
Yeah.
blue tacked them on the wall.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think in quite a visual way,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you both do when you're writing or creative, but I kind of look at things a lot.
Yeah.
So that really helped me.
No, yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, I know he has a. Well, I don't know how you have it with the Apple photo collection albums and stuff like that, but I sort of have the same thing. Like, if I see something, especially on Pinterest,
Yeah.
and it kind of gives you the mood of something that you're going for, and then you kind of reference that.
I love mood boarding.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's definitely useful for
Yeah.
creative stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of describing it. And it also makes me think of, on cop shows now, they have those kind of the suspects at the
Yeah,
bottom.
yeah, yeah.
So it's that
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of thing as
That's
well.
what it kind of
isn't
looked like
Yeah.
as well. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, wow, is she planning on?
I haven't
The
murdered
Grand
anyone.
Piccadilly heist.
I was like, wow, this is very elaborate. Am I part of part of something here? And what would you say was the first of the last meaningful item to you when you was writing this book, or did you not have one? It's fine. if you
What
don't.
you mean? Well, and there was the jigsaw that someone gave
The
me
jigsaw,
as well.
yes,
Which,
yes,
but
yes.
it's like I don't really do jigsaws, and I
Yeah.
was thinking that I've got no table big enough to do
To
this.
do it.
This to have it out
Okay,
for
is it
weeks
like
and
a
weeks.
proper big?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and so I think I have lied and told the person who gave it to me that I have done it, but it was kind of it
How
was.
would they know?
So I'll tell them
Put
not
it
to
out on
listen to
record.
this.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
But it was such a nice thing of them to do. They saw it in
Yeah.
Oxfam and bought it for me. And it's got a kind of, Victorian picture of Piccadilly Circus, and then,
Yeah.
well, it probably would have been the 60s. So those kind of very bright colours you got in old
Yeah,
postcards.
yeah. And sort of it had the same sort of look as your cover.
Yeah. No, I like the cover. I didn't have anything to do with the cover of the book
Yeah.
apart from saying it's great. So I feel like I can brag about it. But,
Was that
I
more like a
think-
publisher thing than? in terms of
yeah, so
actual
they
book?
took ages to choose it because because Piccadilly stands for so many different things.
Yeah.
And this is you probably noticed it's a Lowry painting, and normally he's associated with the North and matchstick
Okay, yeah.
men and women. And I think it looks like a kind of Art Deco poster you might get in the Tube.
Yeah.
So I think it's a
yeah.
really clever design, which I had nothing to do with, but I
No,
think it looks nice.
to be fair, it is something that you'd actually see on the tube, or like even on the postcards
Yeah,
about
exactly.
welcome
Yeah,
to London
yeah,
or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And I wanted to touch up on a bit of how you came into the whole creative writing process, and what was your first like early introduction into essentially creativity. Like when you was younger, were you an avid reader, or was it a case of as you grew up, you decided to get more into
No, well, I think it's
writing?
probably partly being an only child.
Yeah.
And I used to read a lot, and I used to read Enid Blyton books a lot.
Yeah.
And it turned out, I found out later on, that she actually taught at my secondary school, but they
Okay.
completely hushed it up because they didn't think she was a good writer.
Oh.
But I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know. And I mean, I know she's kind of guilty of, lots of the faults of when she was writing,
Yeah.
in that, some of the characters have servants and things like that, which
Yeah.
wasn't my experience of growing up. But I loved them, and they got me into kind of reading. And I loved history.
Yeah.
And my dad was a really good storyteller, so he
Yeah.
was Scottish, so I think I inherited that as well.
Okay.
And then I did history at university, became a journalist, and all my articles were naturally much longer than they should have been. So I realised
Yeah.
I should be trying to write books.
Was it in a case of you just liked writing that they were longer, or was it just because that was just more information you wanted to
I
give
think
out?
always found out too much.
Yeah.
So, and there was always, because I'd start asking people things that wasn't really relevant to the
Yeah.
news story. And so I suppose I always wanted to write books.
Oh, yeah, of
Came from
course.
that, yeah.
And obviously you took the route of non-fiction.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, did you write any fiction, or was that not
Yeah.
really? Okay,
No,
you
I
did.
used to
Yeah.
I used to try writing fiction,
Yeah.
and I love reading fiction
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
And I'm married to a crime novelist,
Yeah.
so I've got
same.
nothing against fiction,
Yeah.
but I really love non-fiction because I
Yeah.
think they're the best stories, and you don't have to worry about plots because it's true.
That's true. Yeah,
And I love finding out about ordinary people,
Mm,
and I love doing research as well.
because I think even finding out about ordinary people, you've had so many different. You could, in a way, say characters because
Yeah, no, they are
yeah,
characters.
yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially, in the book that then you, I'll speak about one that actually hurt. Well, yeah, that I found a bit sad. But like I think with nonfiction is interesting in a way that like for example, Piccadilly is a real place that you can go, and then you can actually like see the. I think the Caf de Paris.
Café de Paris.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Paris. I
Yeah.
butcher that name.
No, that's-
So I don't have the seasoning, the culture in me. But so yeah, so I think it was then shut down and like I said, it was reopened, but now it's like changed completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like a bit sad the fact that that's
Oh,
happened.
well, yes. And I mean, so the Café de Paris, I came across that story when I was listening to lots of oral history accounts in the
Yeah.
Imperial Museum. And I think it's just such a brilliant story. So
Yeah.
it's about this nightclub and which claimed it was blitzproof. And,
Yeah,
it's all
yeah.
about kind of pride, really.
Yeah.
And then this high explosive bomb came down a ventilation shaft and killed and maimed lots
Yeah.
of people. Really, really tragic story. And so my husband kept saying, "You must go and visit the Café de
Yeah,
Paris."
yeah.
And I was saying, "No, haven't done all my research. The moment's not right." He
Yeah,
said,
the
"No,
moment's not
but
right,
you,
yeah.
you must go." And I was saying,
Yeah.
"What could possibly stop me from
Yeah.
visiting the Café de Paris?" And then we had a pandemic, and I've never been inside the Café de Paris.
Yeah.
To this day.
No, and
Did it change?
yeah.
It did.
So and
Oh,
when it
no.
was kind of locked up for a long time. And I remember the
Yeah.
closest I've come to stealing anything was that I walked past and some of the little gold squares had
Yeah.
fallen off. And I really wanted to pick one up and steal it. But next door there was a really scary looking bouncer.
Well,
And I
okay,
just
yeah,
couldn't
exactly,
bring
yeah,
myself to do it. And now it's completely different. And I think it's like an Ibiza style kind of nightclub.
I checked out and I
Right.
was like, this is.
Yeah. So, yeah, but it does kind of look quite like the Café de Paris would have looked with the kind of stairs coming down and the
Well,
glass.
yeah, from the pictures that I've seen it, yeah.
Yeah, but
it-
I'm kind of thinking if I'd kind of phoned them and said, "Well, I'd like to tell you about a high explosive tragedy that
That
happened,"
happened,
and
yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
guessing they wouldn't want me to come in.
yeah, they're
but-
like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, because they changed it after the pandemic.
yeah,
like
'cause-
2020 was it? That
yeah, I
day?
think
Yeah.
it's because it obviously had to close. Because if you look
Yeah.
at pictures, I mean, you couldn't have got less COVID secure really,
No,
because
of
people were
course,
really
yeah.
crammed in there. So
Oh.
yeah.
But again, see, even that is like a lot of that you can get from the non-fiction aspect. And what was like your first ever like non-fiction that you read, if you can remember it, that made you go, okay, yeah, this is what I want to get into
Yeah,
writing.
no, that's a really good question. So I remember kind of reading history books,
Yeah.
and I remember my dad telling me about Mary Queen of Scots because he was Scottish, so he quite liked her because she was
Yeah.
kind of trying to overturn
Yeah,
the English
just
crown.
everything.
Yeah. And I liked her because she was a woman, but
Yeah.
I didn't like stories that were about politicians and kings and queens.
Mm.
But I remember going on holiday with a friend, and I took this biography of Colette, who was a Parisian singer and writer.
Okay.
And I just thought she was an amazing woman. And I
Yeah.
really like the fact that you find out a lot about her time when you read a good biography as well.
Yeah.
And there was a story in it which I still remember where she used to go to these kind of parties in the sewers
Yeah.
of Paris.
Okay.
And there was this duchess, and she had one black rat on one shoulder and one white rat on the other
Okay.
Real,
shoulder.
real rats.
Yeah, real rats.
Wait, real
Um,
rats. Oh,
Yeah,
goodness, yeah.
and I thought
It's
that
my
kind of
kind of party.
no, it was not.
Okay.
I would hate that kind of. I would be out there. That made me think that kind of detail really
Yeah.
brings the past alive. So
No, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so it was that kind of thing that really thought, oh, nonfiction can be really exciting.
Yeah, and that's how, like, because I used to go through Piccadilly a lot, and especially like if you go through in London, there's a lot of buildings that look very cool.
Yeah.
Um, and like i- the when there's Oxford Circus
Yeah.
and then you go down Regent Street,
Yeah.
I had no idea that that building there was Swan and Edgar.
Oh yes. Which
I thought it was like maybe a theater or something,
yeah.
like, because there's
Yeah.
theaters all around, but and it looks amazing at night, and it's
Yeah.
got the Waterstones right on the
Further along.
Regent side,
Yeah.
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 And I had no idea like what that building was, and everything just feels locked off and just like, don't come near me.
Yes.
But then reading this, I was like, oh, so that's what that building was.
Yeah.
That's what it had.
Well, that's really great to hear, because I think every building has kind of ghosts in
Yeah.
it and different lives.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, because Swan and Edgar just looks it's gleamingly white, isn't
Yeah.
it? And you wouldn't know what's behind it, or all the people who've worked
Like
there.
it
or lived there.
doesn't like Selfridges, this is Selfridges.
Yeah.
But that one, I had no idea what it
No.
was. It was just sitting in the cross section
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
roads,
And it's quite anonymous, but it's a huge
yeah,
building
but
as well.
it's like right there. You
Yeah.
can't miss it, and it's like it's got nothing on it. Is it? I don't know if you know about why, but is there a reason why they have nothing on there, that they just want to keep it plain?
So they're probably not allowed to do anything to
Yeah.
it, the front, but I think behind it is just kind of offices and businesses. So nothing,
Yeah,
nothing very exciting
extraordinary.
there.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, these are the kind of things that I really enjoyed about, because like we were having a chat before, and I was saying like this isn't normally a book that we would read like in general, but yeah, like growing up, like history was always one of my favorite subjects in school, and I kind of got annoyed when like history lessons were cut short from like the storytelling side of it. I thought I
Yeah.
always like really loved that part of it.
Mm.
So I found like really interesting when you develop these characters and dug in a bit more about it, like the sculpture for the Eros statue.
Alfred Gilbert, yeah.
Alfred Gilbert, like all his stories and like how he ended up in, I think it was Belgium or something.
Yes.
So like yeah, I really enjoyed that part of it, and the way you carried that on throughout the book
Yeah.
as well.
Well, so that I love doing that kind of thing and finding out, and it's so easy, relatively. I probably shouldn't say this, if you to find out things and to just you can lose days just following trails. And I think that's the danger with nonfiction when you write nonfiction. I remember one of my first editors said, I said, so what makes a good biography? And he said, it's what you leave out that makes a good biography. I think that's probably true of all writing, but maybe particularly of nonfiction, because you get all this massive information and often it's quite hard won, and you have to dump a lot of it.
Yeah, and you have to then kind of funnel all of
Yeah.
that into a succinct kind of story that makes
Yes.
sense for people to follow along.
Yeah.
Which can be tough, especially when it's real, because so many different things. I mean, in fiction, you can decide what was real or what wasn't.
Yes.
But with this one, it's like, oh yeah, but this was happening at the same time
Yeah.
as this. And like I said, one of my favorite, I guess, chapters, which was the
Leon's T-shirt, was it?
Huh?
Leon's T-shirt.
no, it was the Nippies were my favorite people, but
Yeah.
we'll get to that. But it was the bombing.
Oh, the Cafe de Prix.
Yeah. And it was because of the build up to the bomb of like different people and all of
Yeah.
that, of course. And it's like there's so many different people and so many different things that was happening that you funneled it so well
Oh, well, thank
into
you.
like it felt like episodic.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed
And
writing
like the way
that.
the scenes changed.
Yeah.
And,
And I suppose there was such really good material there
Yeah.
as well, and so many different people. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just very rich people.
Yeah.
The band I think
The
is really
band as well,
interesting,
yeah,
and
yeah,
Snake Hips
and-
Johnson is such a
Yeah,
wonderful
Snake
character.
Hips.
Great name, great name.
Yeah, and how it brought out the best and worst in
Yeah.
people as well.
Yeah.
So it's such a dramatic story. It's a kind of gift to write about, really.
Yeah. And it's like finding that research is like, okay, I want to put that in, and then having to put it concisely, like you said, due to short attention spans of people. If it was to be made longer, I don't think. Well, I mean, if you're interested in the story, you would still read it. But like as you were saying, the younger generation isn't necessarily
captivated.
into all of that.
No,
So
well, it's funny because I wanted to write the whole book on the Cafe
Yeah.
de Prix,
yeah,
and my editor said, "No, you can't do Piccadilly Circus,"
Yeah.
which, and I think that was the right call, really, because I think to have it and just distill it in that way, it does make it takes the most of the drama from it.
no, it does, because you
Um,
brought in the sense of the area, what
Yeah.
the area meant, and
Bit of
then you brought
context,
in,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know as well, is like, so once you started getting into nonfiction, how was the process of actually getting your work published? Was it a tough process, or was it?
So the first book I ever wanted to write was about women and comedy and
Yeah.
how women tell jokes in a different way. That really
Yeah.
interests me. And I approached a publisher directly, and they said, "Can't quite make that work, but you need to get yourself an agent
Yeah.
and take it from there." So I got an agent, and she tried a few people with that idea, and it wasn't quite working. And then she said, "Why don't you write a biography of Mari Lloyd, who was a musical performer?"
Yeah.
And so that's how I got into it.
Yeah.
And I think probably it is easier to get nonfiction published and to get an agent for
Yeah.
nonfiction than fiction, because
How
nearly-
comes?
Oh, I think because it's harder to get fiction published, and I think more people want to write fiction,
Nonfiction,
perhaps.
yeah.
Yeah, and then the Mari Lloyd book, I was lucky because my agent found an editor who knew about her and was passionate about that. So you kind of need a bit of luck
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
of course, to
Yeah.
find it. And was it how did it feel once you finally? Because I always like to ask authors how it felt to actually see your work on like display at a shop.
It's just amazing. It's
I
nothing.
can imagine.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, that thrill just never disappears.
Yeah.
And, it's still really thrilling for me to think that you two have read the book. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just,
Like you're sitting with people that have actually read it.
yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
sometimes you think, oh, you're in your little world and you're
Yeah.
reading it, and you probably persuade your husband to read it, and your
Yeah.
agent has to read it, and but then to think that other people are reading it. So I got a message from someone on Instagram who had read it, and she's based somewhere else in Europe, and she said she'd taken it to lots of different European countries with her. And I thought it was amazing. The thought of Piccadilly on tour,
On
Yeah.
tour,
Yeah,
literally,
which is
yeah,
really
yeah,
nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course. And I like one thing that I find interesting as well in terms of the whole like publishing and the need for books, and not only just for books but stories as well. And I like to ask other creatives as well. It's in the terms of like people need, I guess, food, water, shelter. But one thing I've realized is human beings, they need like stories and
Yeah.
art just as much. And it's a case of like, what is it that makes is it the connections in stories? Is it the trying to understand ourselves better? Is it like that need is, I would say, almost just as high as food and water?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And if I'm feeling a bit down,
Yeah.
reading a good book can really
Yeah.
revive me.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to see yourself in lots of different books as well. And I think that creative writing is very therapeutic as well.
Yeah.
So it helps you work out maybe what you're thinking about, where your place is in the world. And that's been kind of scientifically shown that it can really help people. For example, people in prison, if you give them creative writing, they can suddenly imagine a different ending for themselves and a different world. So I think it's incredibly powerful.
Like
writing.
allowing them to just write their own story.
Yeah,
or
absolutely anything. And then it kind of it's almost like a kind of a jump start to think, oh, there are other possibilities, and you're not just stuck in this way that people have typecast you as.
Yeah, I mean that's like one of the things like we picked up on, like when we were reading a lot more. I mean, I kind of wanted to talk about this. Like when we started the podcast, I was like growing up, I had a real love for books, and mainly because of like the good guys in the books, the main characters. Like these are the kind of guys I aspired to be like when I grew up.
Yeah.
And then we also read a lot of dystopian novels, and a lot of them talk about the idea that we end up in some kind of society where you get your food, you get your drink, whatever, you get your shelter, but then there's no, like, I think 1984 was one of them. Like creativity is just absolutely reduced, and I think naturally, like you talk about like going back to the caveman days and telling stories around fires and all this kind of stuff. So, like, I think it's a real need for us, and that's why I kind of always try and encourage my friends to read a bit more. And
yes, and I think sometimes it's not valued because it's seen as, well, it can be quite a lonely pursuit, can't it? You just sit in the corner with your book, and also you can feel guilty that it's you're wasting time, whereas you should be something else, doing something else. But I think also if you want to be a writer, you've just got to read loads and loads. And there's a really good book by Stephen King, which I always recommend on writing. I don't know if have you come across that?
Not
Oh, it's
sure.
brilliant.
He's got a
What's it
book on
called?
writing.
Yeah, so it's
Oh,
the only book by him I've read, not because I disapprove of what he does. I'm just a bit of a scary
okay.
cat. But, so it's a
Yeah.
memoir, and it's about his how he writes, and he
Yeah.
says something like he reads 70 books a year.
Oh wow.
That's like
Yeah,
that's over two. That's over 2 books. I think that's almost 2 books a week or something like that.
something like that. But
Yeah.
he says that's really important, and he
Oh.
says that you need a place to go to regularly to write. It could be like a cafe or something,
Yeah.
but he says something like the muse needs to know where you're going to be
Mhm.
because eventually they'll show up.
Yeah.
So it's
That's a
just full
great
of
point,
really
yeah.
good advice and advice about writing dialogue and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's actually a solid point, to be fair.
Mhm, for
About
sure.
because I always feel like there's a certain calf that I go to and I feel more productive.
Uh-huh.
So that's probably what it is. I think my body's just used
Yeah,
to like,
yeah.
oh, this is we're at a creative place right now. Let's just get the
Yes.
juices flowing.
Yeah. And it doesn't need to be anywhere kind of grand, like Dan Brown, for example. I think he wrote in an airing cupboard or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, not that he produced the best work, but, at least he did produce
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. And to get into the book, I think it's always best if the author describes the book. Because I think if we did it, it might not give it the justice that.
And it's also like our
Far
take on
deserves.
it will be different from your
From-
original
yeah.
idea.
Right. Oh, well,
If you wanted to describe Piccadilly,
yeah.
how would you describe it
Well,
to
I
someone
think
that doesn't know?
I think that's a cop out on your behalf. But anyway, so
You love
I could give a description
no,
afterwards.
well, you
but-
can tell me what you think. So,
Yeah.
what I was aiming to do was to kind of write a biography of a place.
Yeah.
And I tried to do it partly by tethering the stories I really liked to the main buildings around Piccadilly Circus.
Yeah.
And I started about 1893 because that's when Eros arrived.
Okay,
because
yeah.
to me, that kind of made Piccadilly Circus, and it's when Shaftesbury Avenue was built. So it kind of changed dramatically. And I take it just until after the Second World War. And then the last bit of the book is kind of telescoped because I wanted to concentrate on the years that for me were the most significant and kind of formed Piccadilly. So it's looking at Piccadilly as a place for meeting, for protest,
Yeah.
a people's place, a place for celebration.
Yeah.
So that's what I was aiming to do.
Yeah.
But what do you think it is then?
That's a great way of actually putting it.
It's just
in
copy what she said.
yeah, absolutely. Now, for me, I think because I have a personal interest in Piccadilly. Like I said, I used to go through a lot.
Yeah.
But on top of that, how I would describe the book is a snapshot of. That's a great word as well.
Mhm.
Snapshot of a historical time period, bubbling and fermenting at Piccadilly that pretty much shaped a lot of culture and a lot of what people decided to do
Yeah.
and how generations moved forward in their lives and
Yeah,
and-
no, I think that's a good way of summing it up too, as well. And I tried to look at kind of cultural and social developments.
Yeah.
So things like shopping and the tube and
Yeah.
transport and attitudes to sexuality as well.
Yeah.
That's really important.
because that's I think with oh sorry how
I
would you
mean,
describe
yeah, I
it?
mean, I would say the same thing. Like, I thought it was really interesting the way you kind of went through those generations and you talked about workers' rights, women's rights, what else? So that's talking about wartime and how that was all experienced from like all the different perspectives and how you kept on linking it back into Piccadilly's lights as well. Like, 'cause for
Yeah.
me, like at Piccadilly, I see the screens and the lights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like you kind of really I think made that a point of emphasis and like always drawing back to that and how people's ideas of like liberation and freedom kind of relates to being in the light and like during the wartime, so, the Blitz and all that. So there's blackout and I think people feel negative around that and I thought you did a really good job
Oh,
of
thank
portraying
you.
that whole.
Yeah.
Of course, first I have to say the writing was amazing.
Oh, well, thank you.
The reason why I even say the writing was amazing is because it's like I think the reason why usually it wouldn't be a book that we would read in the non-fiction, because a lot of non-fiction has, I guess, that stereotype of just like a historian's outtake of, so it's kind of like what you'd read in school. But
Yeah,
but the way
yeah.
you wrote it like felt different. It felt like a series of short stories that was also funny and like witty as well. And it was like, I think the way you said it, like where you had your daughter in mind
Yeah.
for it didn't feel like it was like just a And then in the year 19, something happened.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it felt like, a friend was telling me, oh, did you know this place
Yeah.
here, this
Yeah.
happened? And
So,
yeah.
well, that's great to hear. So, when I teach nonfiction, we teach creative nonfiction, and I really believe it can do all the things that fiction can do.
Yeah.
So, I think structure is really important. The
Yeah.
order in which you tell the story, suspense. I think humor is really important.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't really like reading though. Well, I have to read a lot of factual books, but I prefer books that are telling me a story and
Yeah.
keeping me on the edge of their seat,
Yeah,
which I
of
think
course. Yeah.
nonfiction can do if it's done properly.
Yeah. Which in this case it was, of course.
Good.
So like, all right, drawing back to the idea of a lack of attention span in this current
Yeah.
generation, and it's absolutely true. Like I'm trying to recapture my attention span myself. But question I asked him, I was like, why was it in this medium? Because I see a lot of like really successful like videos that
Yeah.
are portraying like different parts of London, like
Yeah.
the history of all the bridges in London and things like that. And again, like tens of millions of views and stuff like that. So I'm thinking this would be like amazing in like a kind of documentary format or video essay kind of
Yeah.
thing. So like, what made you kind of choose this direction in this age? I would say.
Well, I suppose because I can't do all of those other things, and I can kind of write a non-fiction book.
Yeah.
And I like doing all the research and digging around, and I like the idea that you've got a relationship with the reader.
Yeah.
So you're kind of taking them with you in quite an intimate way. And I don't think you can quite do that in the same way that you could in a documentary, for example. I mean, I love documentaries as well, but it's quite a different medium, isn't it, really?
I agree, because I've always said like I prefer written storytelling because your imagination can just go wild. And like you said, I literally feel like, all right, I'm here with you, and you're taking me around on a tour of all these different places.
Yeah.
And, like jumping in the TARDIS or whatever, jumping out different time periods.
Yeah.
And, coming here, and then like, so this is what happened in
Yeah.
Café de Paris.
Yeah.
Like I really enjoyed that aspect of it. For sure.
Yeah. And I think you can do that in the past if you really get immersed in it. And I remember when I was, because you can get a list of the war dead. So I was trying to collate who died in the Café de Paris. I was kind of poring over it, and I was due to go out for a drink with my daughter, and she came in and she said, oh, she'd basically got a better offer, and she said, but you're with the war dead, aren't you, Mum? You're quite happy with the war dead, aren't you? I said, I'm really happy with the war dead. You leave me with the war dead and go and have a drink. And I was kind of, it was amazing because I almost felt I was in the Café de Paris, and just looking at the names and trying to guess from their background if that was maybe an Italian person who'd been interned, or you could tell that was probably a Greek person, and just trying to guess their stories just from their names.
I think there was like one part that you put in that was a bit sad, which was kind of not just a couple. It was I think it was towards the end of it where you was writing like some people that had planned to go there missed out on that tragic event.
Yes.
And then someone that probably didn't plan to go there but was there, unfortunately, you know what I mean, passed away.
Yeah.
And it's that aspect that you kind of brought in as well with the different people, the small finalities of actions that were taken that either saved someone or costed someone.
Because I mean, and that was what drew me to the story, I think, in the first place, because it's about chance, isn't it?
Chance,
and I think we've all had that near miss probably in our life. And there was someone who decided to go to the loo at that moment when the bomb dropped, or someone who felt they had to ring home at that moment.
Or their position where they
and
it's exactly. If they had the best seat in the house, and that was really bad news. So
and that's like that I don't know, like that, because I remember I had like I wouldn't say a short film, but it was like a short video idea that I wanted to make that was sort of, I guess, on that level of chance, which sounds very morbid now to say. It was a car crash, but essentially the man that dies in the car crash happens to be running late for an interview, so he runs into the road, and the guy that's driving the car bought a faulty car.
Right.
So then it's like, but I want to start it off as like them two absolutely not even knowing each other, and like you don't expect nothing of it. The man buys a faulty car, drives back the faulty car, realizes, oh, this isn't great, the brakes don't work properly and this and that. Simultaneously, there's a guy that's running late for a thing, and then by chance it happens to be on a road that the guy can't stop on, and the guy has to cross the road. And it's like, and it's crazy because it can happen anytime.
Yes, and also can happen for nice things as
nice
well.
Things,
you know, you could be delayed, and that means that you meet your future partner or something. So it's kind of it's scary on one level,
Yeah.
but kind of quite exciting to think that life can change so quickly
So
as well.
quickly, yeah, of course. And do you want to add on to that?
I had another question. So,
Yeah.
like, before we get into other stuff, I wanted to ask about your research process. So
Yeah.
clearly, this has been thoroughly researched,
Yeah.
and I can tell you've already said that you have got a passion for research.
Yeah.
And, like, there's like details like the model for the statue of Eros. He didn't grow beyond 5 feet. I
Yes.
thought that was pretty interesting. I was like, and then you kind of tagged onto his history after that as well,
Yeah.
and when he got old and all this stuff. So what was your research process like? Was there any difficulties you encountered during research?
Well, the pandemic was quite a big difficulty. So, but it did kind of focus my mind, and there were moments when you could go to libraries. So, but it was really funny. All these kind of staid researchers suddenly got really kind of, get out of my way. Because like the London Metropolitan Archives, they closed for a long time as they had to. And then they would kind of open, and then you couldn't get a place to go in, and then you could get, if someone pulled out, you could go in. So it did it was almost like kind of smash and grab. So you go in and think,
Yeah.
what am I looking for?
Yeah, just quickly,
Just photograph everything if you're allowed to. A lot more stuff came online, which is great as well. It's just keeping on top of all that research. And so I've tried lots of kind of software things, but they never worked for me. So I just used old-fashioned index cards. And then reading loads and just remembering to leave stuff out, but being always on top of your research and because I've read students' work where the researchers got hold of them and it's just run away with them. So it's remembering always to kind of why you're doing this research and telling the story and kind of picking out those details as well. So I think things that if you come across something that you instantly want to tell someone else, that's a really good sign, I think.
What was the most interesting thing that you found when you were researching that you had to leave out of the book?
That's a great question.
Yeah. So, well, my editor kind of, there probably would have been even more about Eros in there, but she said, you can do a lecture on this afterwards, which is a very polite way of saying this is getting a bit dull. So I became quite obsessed with him, and I had a whole chapter. There's quite a lot about Hitchcock and his films in there, but I had a whole chapter on one particular film, Sabotage, which is about a little boy who's given a cinema reel to take to Piccadilly Circus, but it's actually got a bomb in it. And it's a brilliant film, I think. But my editor just said, "Sorry, I can't see why you've put this in here at all." and I said, "No, you're right." So that came out. But I enjoyed writing it. And I enjoyed watching the film, but it just had to come out. Really, it's too much Hitchcock.
No, yeah, of course. I mean, even like you can see with the like, let me give a bit more context to that Café de Paris.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I think that for me that was my favorite part. The book was great. Which the context is that it's the middle of the Blitz, so Piccadilly, that people know as the lights glimmering and all of that stuff had to be blacked out, which was a significant moment for people as well, because if Piccadilly is blacked out, then this is real. But then there were some people that instead of going to the shelters and whatnot, they would congregate at the cafe. Was it to just have fun, or was it just to kind of because you put in something of they had the look of let's drink and dance as if we're going to die tomorrow.
So it was a whole mixture of people. So before the war it would have been mainly very wealthy people, bright young things who went, and then it was much more democratic, so you didn't have to dress up quite so much. You could go in your uniform. There were probably quite a few spies in there as well. And people just didn't know what was going to happen. So there was a bit of a kind of let's dance today. Who knows what's going to happen?
And like, so you've built that setting, and in that are like these different characters that you're popping out. So for example, there was that couple that was with their mum.
Talking about that one.
During so the people that were like present, so Snake Hips and so all these people. So you build up like the performer was going to be there, the couple was going to be there, and then it's like we know like there's the bomb that's about to drop, but it's like then you start going to more and more details about the people, and then obviously eventually the bomb does hit, and then I remember I was just like reading, waiting out to see what happened to Snake Hips.
Right.
And the way you wrote it again, which was great, it was like it felt like I was part of the people in the rubble
Right.
checking to see the bodies of
Oh,
people that
that's great.
you
Yeah.
familiarized
Sorry,
us
it
with.
sounds awful saying, "Oh, that's great." that you
That's great. Yeah, tell me more. No, but it's then one of Snake Hips' bandmates when they tried to pull him out, and
Yeah.
Also fell away, I
Yeah,
think,
that
something
was-
like that.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what that would look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then yeah, Snake Hips.
Yes, and I mean, from the, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the photos, but he was such a beautiful
Yeah,
man,
yeah,
so
I did.
elegant,
Yeah.
and you think, what would have happened if he'd survived?
Yeah.
What would he have gone on to?
Did you get the photos?
No, I
I
didn't.
didn't
no.
get I got the photos. It was great.
Yeah.
No, but then obviously he passed away as well, and it was like such a. It kind of then brings you back to the reason why I found it amazing was because it's like it goes from when he was building the scene up, the stairs, the glass everywhere, the people dancing, the champagne, all of that. You kind of have this like Gatsby kind of imagery,
Mm.
and then the bomb hits, and then you kind of go back to like, oh, there's a blitz going on.
Mm.
That's why everything stopped, and then
Yeah,
it kind of goes
yeah.
back to Piccadilly being,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, that's what you can do in non-fiction as you can in
Yeah.
fiction. You can stop and leave your readers,
Yeah.
hopefully wanting to know what happens.
yeah.
And you probably need those kind of resting places if you're writing about something
No,
that's
yeah,
really
of course,
tense.
of course, yeah. And it's like it's crazy because now I kind of look at Piccadilly as what it is, how I've seen it, and you wouldn't even expect that to
No,
happen over there.
no. I often think the tourists,
Yeah.
sitting on the steps have no
Literally,
idea.
and it still kind of has that celebratory aspect.
Yeah.
I remember when Morocco beat was it Portugal in the World Cup.
Right. Yeah.
The place to be was Piccadilly,
Yeah.
and then they went from Piccadilly, and like the flags and everything were there, and like blocking up the road, and they just like paraded all the way down to Trafalgar Square.
Yeah.
So when you were saying like that's where people would come to like celebrate,
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
Can
like
you
it's
imagine?
still,
Yeah.
still,
I mean, I've still seen when Scotland played England at
Yeah.
football. I saw two Scottish fans climbing Eros,
climbing.
but they
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
get very far. They were kind of, you just about touched his foot and they
Yeah,
came
yeah,
down.
they
again.
came down. Yeah, no, but it's crazy how it still kind of has that.
The same vibe that you
Yeah.
got from the book, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's still a chaotic place, isn't it?
It's
Because I
still a
always think,
chaotic, yeah.
am I going to get killed crossing Piccadilly
Yeah,
Circus?
you're
And-
gonna get
Yeah.
Like
pickpocketed.
even-
yeah.
Even in the book, when you mentioned like the video game Call of Duty had a
Yeah.
little map that was like based on Piccadilly Circus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I found that strange when I played the game. I was like, oh, this is a bit weird because I go here every now and
Yeah,
then.
it's-
To,
it's Piccadilly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's certain places that get bombed, and you're like, oh, that's that
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
yeah, for me, like that whole scene as well. I was like envisioning it as a film where I was like, we're seeing the people, they're dancing, and you're like, the shot goes to like the bomb just dropping into the ventilation shaft, and it goes back to the people, and it goes back to the bomb, and then different people, and then you're seeing the bomb descend in your head, and then it drops, and then like everything just explodes and like just chaos. So like it really gives you the visual imagery. So like when I was asking about like why did you choose this medium, I think it was perfect. So
Yeah,
I
well,
really
I think
appreciate
it has popped up in novels, and I think it was it's been in a couple of plays. You get references to the Café de Paris because I think people are kind of really taken by it and the sense of fate in it as well.
Yeah. And this was my first introduction to it too.
Right, that's a
I've
whole new
never heard of it
generation will
before.
know now.
Yeah, no, of course. And I was like, oh wow. I was just surprised that I didn't know about it. in a
No.
way, you know.
Well, as I say, I think the current owners probably would rather. it
Would
was
ra- yeah,
kept
yeah.
quiet.
They've just changed the whole outlook of it.
Mhm.
And like I said, it's crazy how you see Piccadilly and everything that it's become.
Like going back to Chance as well, like the couple that were dancing, and the woman that died, and then her husband went on and became a fighter pilot. I think.
Yes.
Like that could have, like on a small level, affected the war because he must have
Yes.
been
Yeah.
successful in that regard. So like,
Yeah, I had a fantasy of kind of because I've got a picture of his grave and of her grave, and I'd love to take some flowers to both of their graves or something because it just seems like such a sad story.
Yeah, it does. And to also kind of touch up on, I think, what it was near the beginning of the book, about even the sculptors and the man that I think designed
Albert
Eros.
Gilbert.
Yeah.
Alfred Gilbert, yeah.
And the fact that like obviously now Piccadilly is essentially synonymous with the statue, but
Yeah.
at the time people weren't really.
No, I mean, I felt really sorry for him because he bankrupted himself
Yeah.
doing it.
It was like actually
I
tragic.
found that very strange.
You know,
And then people were so rude about the
Yeah.
statue. And lots of people disapproved because it was in an area of London that was renowned for prostitution.
Yeah.
And Lord Shaftesbury, who it was named after, was this very upstanding philanthropist. And here's this kind of semi-naked boy in the sky.
Yeah.
And people complained about the water and the flower girls getting soaked.
Yeah.
And, it must have been awful for him.
No, absolutely. And it's kind of like it made me think about the perspective of some artists just might not get the flowers at the time of it, and
Yeah,
then they'll never
exactly.
know how impactful
No.
that, like
Yeah.
Van Gogh is another example.
Yeah.
They won't really know the impact that their work has had. And like I remember one Doctor Who episode which was amazing.
Van Gogh episode.
The Van
Oh,
Gogh
yeah, that
one.
was a great episode.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
really sad, wasn't it?
It
Really
was.
poignant. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's kind of like you kind of wish you could
Yes.
show artists how much that, like the fact that that guy probably thought, oh, okay, like bad about his thing, doesn't know that it is Piccadilly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that so he just about towards the very end of
Yeah.
his life had a sense of it being significant. But I mean, he suggested at one point that it would be best to melt it down and give the money to the homeless
Yeah.
people. And George Bernard Shaw said he should have been drowned in his own
Yeah,
fountain.
yeah.
It's just awful.
It's crazy.
It's that ridiculous backlash that you get.
Yeah,
Yeah,
know, you're right. It's so modern in some ways, isn't it? Really, as
But it's
well.
also like interesting in art. Like right now, someone might love your piece, but then later on they might not. Like you might
Yes.
get this different stigma, and people. Be like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
exactly.
they don't
When we
want that."
were talking about pulling down statues and things like that, and all
Yeah.
those kind of traditional statues that are just hideous now.
Yeah,
whereas
yeah.
Eros has stood the
Just
test
Test of the time. Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of you had any more?
I had some question about creative process, but I'm conscious of time, so
Yeah.
it's good.
No, you could ask.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask what your creative process is like in general. Like, how do you come up with all these ideas? You mentioned keeping, like, you some parts are longer than you'd like, some parts maybe shorter than
Yeah.
you'd like. And, like, how do you decide on all these things? And, of course, you're working with your editor and all this. but-
Yeah.
yeah.
So I don't tend to show my work to many people for quite a long time, and I try and get it in a state that I think is decent. And then if I want a second opinion, I'll normally show it to my husband because he's a writer himself and he's used to be a journalist. So I value his feedback, and he likes history, but he writes fiction. So that's a kind of good combination. But it never, that kind of feeling of being crushed if someone doesn't like your work is just never goes away, or just feeling really anxious when you send it off.
Yeah.
So I think that gets worse actually, the more books you write.
Okay.
So I think, we're and sharing any kind of writing is I really
No,
admire
it's such a
people for doing-
vulnerable thing.
Yeah,
To do.
yeah.
I remember I used to share with
I was
with
quite
Mo
brutal
here,
as well.
and
like-
he would absolutely just be like, "What is this?"
And how did you take that?
I didn't take it well.
No, so
Yeah,
he's
and-
obviously not the person
Absolutely
to
not.
reach out to. No.
I
Have you
decided.
learned that now?
I decided
Yeah.
to never send
Yeah,
it back to
send
him.
me a
Good.
link.
No,
Yeah.
well, that's fine. 'Cause
That's what you
then
have
it
to
might
do.
have ruined your friendship. So I think you need to find someone else.
But then I'll like read it to my brother, and he'd think this is the best thing that's
Oh, well,
ever
that's equally
existed.
not very good, is it?
Yeah, I know. So I was kind of like, which one? What do I do here?
Yeah.
But to be fair, though, it was
It's
constructive
constructive,
because my writing was awful. To be
Yeah,
fair.
no, but you need to say why it's awful. So,
Yeah, no,
Don't
he,
worry, I did.
he gave me a PowerPoint presentation.
oh my,
yeah.
seriously?
Nah,
That
joking,
was
he
it,
didn't
PowerPoint.
give it. But it was.
That means I liked it. If I would make the whole PowerPoint presentation, then
Yeah, no, he'd like this is like he would annotate it like this isn't right. This doesn't
Yeah.
grammatically make sense, and this
Yes.
one here needs a comma. And
Did he
got-
say when he liked things, though?
yeah,
Okay, right.
yeah, I'm not one of those friends. But yeah, I mean, I sent him some of my stuff as
Right.
well, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
but
I think I'm my biggest critic. Like, do you find that you're your own biggest critic, or
Um,
do you actually like your stuff? Like,
well,
as a-
no, sometimes I think, oh, God, this is really boring, or, and I think I must come back to that.
Mhm,
But there comes a point where you just have to, otherwise, you have to plow on.
mhm.
Some writers said you just have to lower your standards
Yeah.
because otherwise you'd never write anything.
yeah,
So there are going to be days when your writing isn't good, but you need to keep going.
yeah,
Really.
no, absolutely, and sort of also round it off. So you do a creative course?
Yeah, so I teach, and if you're able to, perhaps you could put the link out there.
Yeah, of
because
course.
Yes, sure.
I teach at the Institute of Continuing Education, and we have loads of courses there, some
Yeah.
online. We have a master's in creative writing, and I think we're going to have a bursary announcement quite soon, which I'd really like to
Because that
tell you
sounds like
about.
something I'll be pretty interested
Great,
in.
good.
Yeah.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, no,
so
of
that
course.
any kind of, we have 3 masters, one a general one in writing for performance, and crime and thriller writing, and then lots of other courses as well. So,
Yeah.
and we've had some really good successes. So, I mean, in terms of published work, so Sarah Collins, I don't know if you know her novel, the Confessions of Franny Langton, which was made into an ITV miniseries. So she's one of our former students. And the Bloodthirsty Unicorn series, Scandal, is by one of our students as well. So, I mean, that's one way of measuring success, but the other is, just if you finish your novel or something is successful.
Yeah, of course. And having that thing to actually push you to finish it.
And a kind of group of people who are not as horrible as your friends,
Absolutely.
but giving you more critical, supportive feedback.
Look where we are now. You need it.
No, absolutely. And obviously, I just wanted to say as well that, as like you said at the beginning, you didn't expect us to read your book. I just wanted to say that in terms of even ourselves trying to bridge that gap between, like I said, I always have in the back of mind trying to make our podcast light and entertaining, so that people aren't daunted by books, and that are like, oh, this is actually kind of funny, this is actually kind of cool, and this and that. And I feel like this would be a different genre as well, because we did touch on a lot of fiction. In terms of non-fiction, that this is a good like bridge to get into non-fiction, because it isn't as daunting or as like, it wasn't something that we'd go like, we went, oh, I don't want to read this anymore.
Oh, well, that's good. And that's kind of what, I mean, I wanted it to be fun and entertaining as much as anything else. So,
no, absolutely.
Yeah, I did start reading it and I was like, I'm not really enjoying it as much, but that's just like pure, like a bit of stubbornness on my part, and also that I haven't read this style of writing for probably
it's
time.
a change in gear, isn't it? You have to read in a different way.
But as it got further and further, I was like, I'm really enjoying this.
Good.
So,
And obviously, I think it helps because you're very talented to
Thank you.
be able to,
Thank you.
able to bridge that gap even for us. And for that, I'd like to say thank you for
Well, thank you for
taking
reading
time
the
out
book.
to, no, of course, it's our pleasure. And thank you for taking time out to sit down with us
Oh,
to
it's been great
talk
fun.
about the book.
We
Yeah, it's
appreciate
been
it.
amazing.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so that's been us, your boys from Paper Trails Podcast, Inspire Reads. We hope you guys stay creative, and we hope to see you guys on the next one.
Yeah, check her work out. Buy her book.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
that as well.
Great to be here.
We'll put the links and everything in the description.
you.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
sure. Appreciate it.
Great,
All right, cool.
thank you.
That's it.
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the Paper Trails Podcast. If you like this episode, please leave a review, comment, like, and subscribe. And be sure to follow us on all our socials.
Keep moving, keep growing, keep learning. See you at work.